Hi there, and welcome to episode 73 of BS with Writers. I am Nancy Smay. I'm your hostess, and also the founder of Evident Inc., which is a story shop, meaning we edit, do story coaching, and consult on story strategy for writers from all genres and all publishing intents. I'm really excited about today's episode, you guys. I interviewed Denny S. Bryce, who is someone I've known a really long time, not well, but we both lived in the DC area in the past, and we're both part of the same romance writers chapter. So I knew of her at that point, but since I have known Denny, she has published 6 phenomenal books. She writes historical fiction with all kinds of characters, always finds a really awesome story that I think and I ask her about this, but what I love about historical fiction is the writers that I love seem to be able to find one thing that happened or some little tidbit from history that might be widely known or more likely is not well known. And then they just build an entire book out of it, digging into these crazy historical facts that most people have never bothered to look for or even thought about. And some of the most incredible stories come out of it. So she published a book the week that this is released called The Trial of Mrs. Rhinelander. And we talk about that. So stay tuned for that. She also wrote a book with Eliza Knight, co-written, about Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald and their friendship during a time when it was difficult to be a woman, especially difficult, I think, to be a Black woman. So fantastic, really interesting books. And I'm super excited to have someone who is not an indie romance writer. Nothing against indie romance writers. I know a lot of them. In fact, guess what? I am one. And have been for 10 years. So absolutely no shade, but I really do want to talk to writers from all across the realm of writing, and not even just fiction. So if you know someone who you would love to hear interviewed, please do drop me a line. You can always reach me at nancy@evidentinc.com. On to personal things. As you guys know, I have been dipping a toe into a different genre. I am a romance writer, but that doesn't define me. And I have recently been feeling really curious about exploring a little bit more of the realm where I tend to read, which is psychological thrillers and cozy mystery. So I am releasing my first cozy mystery book August 15th under the pen name Nancy Stewart. As you know, I write romance as Delancey Stewart. So I'm trying to keep it all kind of in one bag. But I'm really excited about the way things have been going. I love the cover. I love the responses I've been getting from readers so far. Since this is the first book in a new genre for me, I have been working really hard to try to pull some of my readers from Delancey's list and Delancey's followers over to my cozy mystery launch. I think I have a lot of crossover. I do tend to survey my readership as Delancey at least once a year. And I know that I pull women 35 to 70 or beyond. And that the things that they really like about my books are that they are set in small towns, that they really strongly feature found family and realistic relationships between relatable characters. So those are things that I know I pulled into the mystery because it's set in a small town. And as much of the story is about the developing relationships between Dahlia, who is the amateur sleuth, and her niece, who she becomes guardian of in the beginning of the first book. And then the assorted cast of characters that you need in a cozy mystery, which I just learned when I went to CozyCon last week. It's called the Scooby Crew or the Scooby Squad after the Scooby-Doo gang. So I'll also give a quick plug for that conference. If you are delving into the realm of cozy mystery, or even if you want to explore your strengths a bit more, Becca Syme runs fantastic conferences. They are small, they are charming, they are intimate. And I went not knowing that I would know anyone besides Becca, and just had the best time. Met all kinds of new people, made some friends, made a lot of contacts. It was awesome for networking, which I think really small conferences like that really can be, if you're willing to kind of open yourself up and get out of your comfort zone and talk to people. Which, clearly I'm sitting here in front of a camera and a microphone. Talking is not a weakness that I have. I love meeting people. I love connecting. I love connecting other people together. So it's right up my alley to go sit in a room full of people I don't know and make new friends. However, it is exhausting, and I do need a good amount of downtime after something like that. I don't define myself as an introvert by any means, but I do really treasure quiet and alone time. So I have to find ways to kind of put those two parts of my personality together so that they can live happily side by side instead of fighting. Anyway, that is kind of what's going on. I continue to write each day. I am working on 2 Vela stories in addition to the mystery series. One of them is a romance. One of them is kind of what is it? It's sort of a why choose. It's not YA, but it feels a bit YA. It's like an academy adventure with shifters. It's paranormal. I don't get to write that stuff in my books, so I'm writing it as a serialized fiction on Vela, which has been a lot of fun and kind of just a writing exercise. I don't feel like I am as structured there. I don't have to follow my plot. I kind of go where I want, and that has been super fun. So if you are interested in short writing, maybe try Vela. They're actually running a contest right now called the Vellies too, so it's a good time to start. I think that is about all I have for right now. It is July 24th as I am recording this. And right now at my house, we are looking at going back to school. Football has started. Wrestling is starting soon. Well, wrestling's a winter sport, but they do a lot of lead up. So high school sports are so serious, but my youngest is starting high school. So it's a whole new schedule, a whole new school, a whole new load of who knows what. And my oldest is going to be a senior, which is just really hard to believe because in my head, he's 5, but he drives and has a job and is dating a girl. So I guess my head is wrong. Anyway, let's get into the interview. I'm really excited for you to meet Denny S. Bryce and hear about her process and the way that she approaches her really awesome writing. So here's the episode. So I wanted to thank you, first of all, Denny, for agreeing to chat with me the day before your book comes out. I feel very honored.
That's okay.
And
I wasn't doing anything today, just hanging out.
Well, that's what we'll do. We'll just hang out. We'll hang out together for a little bit.
Okay.
So I haven't seen you in a really long time. I think the last time we probably saw each other in person was either at an RWA convention or more likely at a Washington romance writers meeting, like a decade ago, maybe.
Way back in the day, because I haven't been involved in RWA since a very interesting day in 2019.
I have not either.
Or 20. I can't remember. It's been so long.
Yeah, I think I've just taken all that and put it over here because it was just a lot.
Just stuff.
Yeah. Well, so can you tell me a little bit about who you are as a writer, as a person, what kind of genre you're working in, and what you do? I'll just preface this. I'm really excited because so far I have chatted mostly with indie authors, and I'm really excited to get kind of a different point of view. So,
okay.
Yes,
I am traditionally published. Okay, full name, Denny S. Bryce. Anywhere you look on the internet, you put all of that together and you will find me. Website, social media handles, etc., etc. I was published, my debut novel came out in March of 2021. Okay. I almost said 1920 something because the book is set in the 1920s. So after that, well, preceding that, my focus as a writer was study. And I also did a lot of volunteer work, but I was very, very, and still am very attracted to craft, and love it dearly, love exploring the different writing philosophies that are out there and that exist. And currently, I am also a professor, an adjunct professor at Drexel University in its MFA program. So I get an opportunity to share my perspectives on some of the craft questions that new writers, and when I say new writers, my MFA students aren't new, they're just choosing to expand upon their knowledge and really enter into the fray, if you will.
Sure.
So I have that drive that has always been a part of what I do. But since 2021, I have a book coming out on July 23rd. I don't know when this will actually drop, but that will be my 6th novel. So that means I've written 6 books in 4 years.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and your books are not little slap it off the desktop with 40,000 words, sweet little romance. Yours are like super researched historical fiction, yes?
yeah, that's true. Except I will not ever say negative things about romance structure and romance writing because I'm also a book reviewer.
Yeah.
And if you can write a good romance, I'm going to give you a lot of kudos. Good romances have to fill the rules, if you will, of romance, of course. HEA has to be at the end. But in knowing that the ending is going to be one way and able to sustain the reader's interest and excitement and involvement in the story all the way from top to bottom, I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, you're right. I
I
never thought about it like that, but you're right.
yeah, it's I'm not mad at romance at all.
Yeah.
In historical fiction, which is what I write, I'm always going to include a love story. There's going to be relationships are a part of humanity, a part of our nature, and I'm going to make sure that they're touched upon in my storytelling. But my first book was set in Chicago in the 1920s, and the heroine, if you will, not heroine, but your protagonist, was a chorus girl dancer in the 1920s, but I write in something called a dual timeline. And the dual timeline, one of my favorite things, because you're able to say, this is what was happening in this timeline, but this is what this timeline is eventually going to connect, and there's going to be a relationship between those two. Sometimes the same character, sometimes different POV characters, whatever.
I love it. Those are my
Full
favorite to read.
timelines are very fun. I actually am teaching a class for Sisters of Crime in Jacksonville in the fall on dual timelines, and I'll be also doing that, I think, at Writer's Digest in Cincinnati in October as well.
Ooh.
But so that sort of stuff, I think, is an outgrowth of my passion about craft. Is wanting to share, wanting to teach, wanting to be someone who can be a vehicle through which your new writers, and new writers has no age, someone trying to get into the biz, if you will. If I can assist in any way, that's great. Now back to historical fiction, because the question you asked, because I go on tangents. Do you want to talk about tangents? My mouth can go. Historical fiction and research. I just wrote an article that I have to send to someone after we finish here, where I do talk about some of my process includes looking at history and filing stuff away, because I can be researching while I'm researching. If I stumble across something that is going to perhaps be a part of a story that I'm going to be writing, or am interested in writing, or taking to my new agent, or what have you. I'm always in a fact finding mode on some level. I use some tools that assist me in keeping track of information, because information found is all so very readily information lost.
Oh,
If you,
yeah.
there's nothing worse than sitting in front of your computer saying, I found this and where is it? I don't
Yes.
know where it is. So since I've had that experience a few times, I use I use Scrivener. I mean, Scrivener is critically important um, for me. I mean, thousands, maybe millions of people use Scrivener. But in the author realm, I started using Scrivener before I was writing professionally, for proposal writing when I was running my marketing and PR firm. So I used it for business purposes. So my familiarity with it is pretty good.
So
Always
I'm
grown.
gonna guess that you use, because I use Scrivener. I know a lot of other writers who do, but
Mhm.
I have had this conversation with a couple people where we sort of haha, because we probably use like 5% of
Oh
Scrivener's
gosh.
capabilities. So I'm guessing to manage all of the factoids that you pull up and need to refer back to, you probably use a lot more of Scrivener's capabilities.
Yeah, I probably do. I do a lot of, there's something called Aeon Timeline. You can create when I wrote a book called The Other Princess, which is not near me to show a cover. Well, we're recording, but The Other
That's okay.
Princess took place in the 1840s and 50s and 60s and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But it had to do with an African princess who was, and I put this in quotes, adopted by Queen Victoria. And Queen Victoria had 10 kids. Queen Victoria had a lot of key dates that I had to keep track of, in
Yeah.
addition to all of those children. And there were other historical landmarks throughout those 60 years I was covering that I didn't want to have to remember as
For
I'm
sure.
trying to create. So I take Aeon Timeline, and an initial step in my process on research is to establish the benchmarks. What are those moments in history,
Mhm.
actual events, actual people that may be touched upon in my story, um, that I need to keep track of?
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than mentioning a character in a scene that is a historical figure, and oh, they died 2 years before.
That would not be good.
And you can count on your copy editor, with your publisher, to do a good job, but come on, don't have them digging for the basics. Um,
Yeah.
those are things that the author needs to be mindful of and keep track of. But what
Right.
I was saying about Aeon and Scrivener is I can incorporate what I put together in Aeon Timeline into my Scrivener document, so that I have a record there.
So
Um,
Aeon Timeline is a different piece of software that you use.
yes,
Is
yes,
it
it's
AEON Timeline?
exactly,
Okay, perfect. I just
exactly.
will include all this stuff in the show notes so people can find
Oh, okay.
things.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. A friend of mine, Vanessa Riley, introduced me to that. She's also a historical fiction author, and we just, it's good. It's a
I
good
wondered.
thing.
I always wonder because I read a lot of historical fiction. It's my preferred way to learn about history.
Hmm. Okay.
um, but because I do read a lot of it, I always am curious about two things specifically. Number one, you sort of touched on how in the course of your research, you end up doing more research because something interesting will come up that maybe you'll use in the story, maybe you'll use later. So my first question is, how do you choose or how do you find the interesting little tidbit from history that most people don't know about, but that makes for a fascinating story? Because the things that you have managed to write books about,
Yeah.
like The Other Princess, or the one that you did with Eliza Knight,
Can't be
about the
friends. Yeah.
friendship between Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe,
Right.
just like I assume that people knew a bit about that, but where do you get the idea, and how do you know that this will be the thing that will make a whole book?
Well, with Can't We Be Friends, Eliza and I used to live in the DMV, and so did Eliza. So back in 2019, she and I would go from house to house once a month or every 2 weeks or
Yeah.
whatever, and just have a write in because both of us are full time writers. And so one day we're sitting having a glass of wine towards the end of grueling writer day. And there's this photo that pops up of Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald. And we're like, well, what the heck is this about? Uh, Essentially, what the heck is this about? They
Yeah.
knew each other. They were what? And so we started researching. And this is 2019. And both of us were under contract, are under contract with, either William Morrow or whomever. Eliza is a hybrid author, so she also produces her own publications as well. So we just kept finding things and kept talking to each other about what we were finding and became more and more enamored with, wow, these gals were friends. Let's dig. Let's keep digging. And that's where we started. So some of the resources that I used, I mean, with Marilyn, there's a lot out there.
Sure. Yeah.
So the key became deciphering what was exaggeration, sensationalism, sexism, because the time period was, the 1950s and early 1960s, there was a lot going on in the
Sure.
world,
Oh yeah.
not only in terms of issues with women stars, but there was also, as similar to today, rampant racism and a whole bunch of other things that entertainers, we stayed focused on our two stars, had to endure that people would not automatically think of. You think of Ella Fitzgerald, and she's this amazing voice, this amazing talent. She had some unbelievable challenges, personal, career, and in terms of just trying to get from one place to another, where she'd end up having to face some really ugly racism. And
Yeah.
then you have Marilyn, and you have the tendency to, I felt, and so did Eliza, to portray her as a step away from a dumb blonde.
Yeah.
It wasn't fair. It just, to us, in our writing and development of story,
Yeah.
we wanted to present the woman that we were discovering, who was smart, who was one of the first to have her own production company in Hollywood. Ella Fitzgerald was a workaholic. She was always singing, always on the road. So some of the things we researched, for example, for me, since there was less known about Ella's personal life, I listened to all of her albums and paying special attention to her live albums where she bantered with the audience, where
Oh, fun.
her real voice, if you will,
Yeah.
be sort of identified, and you could get into that. Since I have a heavy background in music and things like that, in the entertainment industry, I just really gravitated towards that. YouTube is a godsend for old TV shows,
Oh yeah.
interviews you'd never ever find any other place. What else is just wonderful? JSTOR. And as a adjunct professor, I also have access to an endless amount of essays, dissertations, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it goes on and on. So the challenge becomes because, for example, Wild Women in the Blues took me 6 years to write. Every other novel, much less time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had to avoid the rabbit hole.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, where you're digging for facts and all of a sudden you get on a tangent, and 2 weeks later you're like, what was I originally looking for? And
Right.
why am I here? You know,
Well,
what's
and
going on?
I've heard that another challenge with historical or with any genre where you have to do a lot of research is then the desire to incorporate the cool thing that you learned, even when it might not quite fit the story. Did you
Absolutely.
find that you had to weed out and not include some really awesome stuff that you wanted to bring in?
I definitely had that experience with the first book and the second book. But by the third book, I started to learn something. I did my benchmark research, of course, first,
Mm-hmm.
but then I only researched as I wrote
Oh, that's
for
interesting.
what I needed.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can really go down and then just have piles of stuff that you're not going to use, but you've
And
invested hours and hours
is
pulling
it
it.
a form of procrastination too? I mean, writers write, but we also find lots of ways not to write.
It was never a
Not for you.
form of procrastination for me. I have other forms of procrastination. There's this devil called social media. There's that. Yeah.
Yes.
And then I just staring into space is another thing that I need to. I have this struggle. I have this struggle because I am writing full time. I am teaching. Everything that I do revolves around the publishing industry and writing.
Yeah.
So I can get distracted from just looking at a new book and digging into the author that if I haven't heard of this author or what have you. The other thing right now, I have 4 books I need to read for blurbs, which I'm very honored to do. And especially when they give me a nice little bucket of time to get
Yeah.
them read. But I also write reviews. Um, um, I write with NPR and freelance for some others. And that is reading books, structuring story ideas, doing the research for that.
Yeah.
So I was telling a friend just last night, I think on the phone, we were chatting, author buddy, and I said, my word for 25 that I'm adopting now is called
Oh, wow.
discipline.
Is
Just
discipline?
discipline.
Well,
Let's
what you figure out would be useful for me too, because now I have just gone full time. Well, I just about 6 months ago, and
okay.
find endless ways. I was like, oh, I'll have all this time. I can just be so like, like settle into my writing career. And I don't know what's going on, but I have found so many more ways to fill this time. Vacuuming has become very important.
Oh, I'm sorry to laugh so loud because that is that's one of my things. To pull out the vacuum cleaner and just do the same spot for 20 minutes.
Right. Well, my also like the shower, the vacuum cleaner, anything that kind of has an ambient noise, I think makes
Yeah,
my brain start turning. So I feel like if I am stuck, sometimes that unlocks things.
it's interesting. Now, I listen to music.
Do you? I
Yeah,
cannot.
a lot, a lot.
I
I love
was a dancer, and so music it activates something inside me. So I can't sit still if there's music playing. And so
well,
being at the keyboard makes it very hard.
I used to be a professional dancer a number of years ago. And the thing is, no longer does it cause me to want to stand up and shake a leg.
That's good,
Um,
I guess.
um, but the joy of music I've always had in all different forms. I love everything,
Well,
and that actually, in terms of another tool that I use in research, is I always search for the music of the era. I
oh, that makes
love it.
sense.
Um, it was fun with the 1840s and 1850s. it was fun to research the African instruments and music of West Africa, where my main character was born and spent a lot of time, in addition to the favorite dances and music of the court of Queen
Right.
Victoria. So we had Mendelssohn and others that, and listening to those sounds. So it's yeah, music is definitely, what did someone say? I used this quote, and it's anonymous as far as I know. If you want to time travel, listen to the music of the time.
Oh, I think that's so smart. And what
Yeah.
a way to build atmosphere and kind of
Mhm.
just a little richness to the tapestry of the time that you're trying to weave. I think that's
Absolutely.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, and so we've kind of gone out of order here, Denny, but I never did get you to kind of talk about your background and how you came to writing. So few of
Okay.
us went to school to become full-time writers. I don't know if that's true for you or not, but I'd
Well,
love to hear how you got where you are.
Catch 22, I guess I was a theater and dance major in college. When I went to work on my master's, that I did not finish, I was a business journalism person.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time in marketing and public relations, to the point where I started my own business, which I had for 20 years. So I did a lot of ad copy, brochures, marketing tools, marketing lingo,
Yeah.
and then public relations activities. Before I got into that, though, I was a dancer in New York, in Chicago. I started as, believe it or not, a ballet dancer.
That's what I
With,
was.
yeah, with Cleveland Ballet many
Oh,
years.
wow.
And then after a brief stint there, because I was like I'm 5'10", and the boy dancers were not 5'10".
No.
And
Well, and on point, then you're 6'3" or 6'4".
yeah,
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 I had the same problem.
yeah. And then they want me to jump and do these lifts and all of this nonsense. And I'm like, even though they could lift me because I was like a bone back in the day, um, I'm like, no, he's too short. I had no
What
faith.
him?
No, I didn't. It wasn't that he was going to drop me.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
don't. He was just anyway. All the dance guys were 5'6"
I know.
at the time. But anyway, I went on to dance. Modern dance is where I really stayed, and also show dancing and stuff. So I was in New York for a while. I never got a job. I got a job on Broadway, but then the show didn't open or something.
No.
Of course, of course. But anyway, it was just youth and it was fun. It was hard work. I loved it. Um, but then I got involved in marketing and PR later
Hmm.
in my process. But what I would do in marketing and PR when I got home after all of this business writing was to write something called fan fiction.
Yeah.
I fell in love with fan fiction. And I wrote Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Love it. Yes.
And um, my couple of choice was Spike and Buffy.
Uh-huh.
None of that angel nonsense. Anyone listening who was a fan of that show understand the fan
Oh, absolutely.
wars between which couple was which and which vampire was really a good guy from which one was a construct. We got into detail
For
online
sure.
about this. But
Where
that
did you, or
writing,
did you publish your fan fiction, or did you just, you did
I
like
had a
Wattpad
website
or?
with 500,000 views, and I mean, I did a lot in fanfic
Okay.
under a pseudonym.
Wow.
And what ended up happening, I mean, we even had conferences, and one of the biggest ones I went to was in Las Vegas with several of. I also even went to London for conferences with Buffy and all that stuff. But Jane Espenson was one of the writers, directors who's still very active in television land today. She did a presentation and talked about novel writing versus script TV writing. And she said you'll have a longer career as a novelist than a TV writer. This is 20 years ago,
Yeah.
but she's still a TV writer. But nonetheless, I met a woman who was on the board of RWA in my um, process as a fanfic writer. And she said, "You should come to one of our national conferences. I think you'd enjoy it. You get to meet people, and your writing is pretty cool." And so that happened, oh gosh, 2008, 9, or 10. I can't remember. And I started going to RWA conferences for vacation. Seriously, for
Well, that's
vacation.
cool.
It was so relaxing. There was, I mean, in comparison to my marketing and PR day, going to an RWA conference was just like, oh, kick back. I'd get in line for pitching books and I'd make something up in line and just, I'm going to do that. I do that all the time.
Love it.
And people would be there sweating bullets. And I'm like, this is not that hard, people. I'd always get requests and from the same people. So I did that for a few years, and then eventually I joined the Washington D.C. chapter. That had its ups and downs. Then I went and got more involved on a national level. That had its ups and downs. And then I got an agent. I was a Golden Heart. I won a Golden Heart. Yeah. That was a thing that they had in
Yeah.
RWA that they just brought back this year.
Oh, did they?
Yes. Trigger. Okay, let me not talk about it. Um, moving on. um, then I got an agent in 2016 at an RWA event. And she was my agent for 7 years. I have a new agent now. And I'm excited about my new agent. And I will say that switching agents, most of the authors I know have had more than one agent. And it's nothing against your first agent, your second agent, or your third. It's being mindful of your career and saying, you analyze these relationships and say, this one is going to take me, boom. This one, there may not be the same mindset that I had about my writing career 7 years ago when this was the perfect match. So you make choices, you keep, I always advise writers to be to try to keep up with the industry they're in.
Yeah.
So just pay attention, read about what's happening in New York, whether you're an indie or a traditionally published author. Read about what's happening in the indie marketplace.
Yeah, great
All of
advice.
it links together in a way that the more you know, the better off you are in
Yeah.
terms of your decision-making process.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, disclose as much as you're willing to, or say, no, I don't want to talk about that. But what led to your like nuts and bolts to your decision to change agents, and how did you go about it? Once you've published a few books, I would imagine it's easier to attract a new agent or to be able to go to the one that you know is the one you want and say, hey, I would like to work with you.
It's all my agent relationship had always been very comfortable, but the if you recall, I mentioned that I got my agent at an RWA conference, which
Sure.
meant that my agent might have an interest in romance writers.
Sure.
And since I was never a romance writer, although she did encourage and direct me to write historical fiction, she looked at all of my books and then said, hey, let's go with this one. And that happened to be Wild Women in the Blues.
Was that
However,
your first published book, Denny? Wild Women?
yes, Yes.
So did
Well,
you had several completed manuscripts to give her to consider?
I had, okay, 3
Ah, okay.
completed manuscripts. But see, and I'd also, well, and completed for me at the time was always a little shaky. Um, it's like I can write a serious 50 pages, but that's contest length. But she had a combination of ways I got her attention was that I entered contest and she was one of the judges.
Ah,
Another endorsement I had for my first book was Julia Quinn, and Julia was one of the judges for the contest and had always loved the story, or what I presented in the 50 pages of
sure.
the book. And so that ended up, when it came out in 21, she's read and endorsed a couple of my books. But
Great.
the thing was, I said, now I'm definitely historical fiction, doing a little bit more biographical historical fiction, but I'm not necessarily going to stick with that. I'm going to move up and down a little bit more. And what I mean by that, biographical is really taking a historical figure and writing their story.
Yeah.
Sometimes it even goes from birth to grave type of storytelling.
Yeah.
Can be very exciting, can be very, yay book. But also historical fiction is you take a subject or you take a time period and some key benchmarks and you say, okay, this is the story I want to tell. A
Yeah.
mystery, a thriller, all in the historical context.
Yeah.
Um, a grand love story. Or for me, it's also incredibly important to showcase Black and or African American protagonists as the heart of the story, so that automatically your book, for me, my books are going to touch upon issues of the time period where the story is taking place, the realities of that time period, and how, for the present day reader, how those historical situations, tragedies, um, you know, people lived through and the love stories that took place then reflect on what's happening today. So
Yeah.
it's not, I don't write stories just for people who want to learn a lesson about history. I want them to be entertained. I want them to be passionate about the characters they're reading about, to really
Yeah.
get into the story. But I also, they're going to learn some things too, or be
Yeah.
exposed to some information that they may or may not have been exposed to before.
Well, and that's what I was saying. This is how I learn about history, because
Yeah,
if I just read a dry history book, no, thank you. But,
not.
give me the facts, but build them into characters that I fall in love with and want to know more about. And that's when I end up talking about the book later, too, because I'll be like, did you know? And then I'll share whatever. So,
Yeah, and one of the things I'm very proud of with my books, pretty consistently, the reviews are going to say well researched.
that's great.
Because
Yeah,
people who I visit Goodreads. I'm not a coward about going to Goodreads. Some authors don't like to
for
spend time
sure.
there, but I don't mind it. And I go there and I see that people who read my books or who I think who read historical fiction love to go and double check the facts.
Very,
It's like Google, "Oh, really? Let me go Google this and see if it really happened that way." And then
I
they're
don't
like,
do that.
yeah.
I'm always like, wow, could that really be true? Like, did that, or was this a real person, or is this one of, because that's the other thing about historical fiction that's so interesting is how do you choose which things to take liberties with and
um,
how closely to stick to facts and like how much
every
leeway do
bit
you
of
have?
dialogue, every bit of dialogue, except Stephanie Dre. I know you know Stephanie, has told me her and Laura, when they wrote oh my gosh, their first big book,
Oh, Hamilton's someone or other?
Hamilton. Well, yeah, the Hamilton.
Stepdaughters or something? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, it was actually Jefferson. Was Jefferson's daughter.
Okay,
The
yes.
first. I can't. I had them. I've read both, but anyway, what
Yep.
she told me that I found, and I did use a little. I followed her judgment on this. If you find letters written by your historical figure, you can look at those letters and say, oh, I got a sense of their dialogue, of what
Oh,
they
that makes
might say, or some of their big quotes. So she drew from, because there were so many letters by
yeah.
Mrs. Hamilton that they could pull from. But your question was, where do you make the choice? 99% of the time, anything that's dialogue is made up.
Sure.
Okay. But made up with facts that you're striving to get the tone, the mindset of the character you've researched heavily on the
Mhm.
page through situations where dialogue is a part of it. I was not there in
Right.
1840 something when Queen Victoria said X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So to my main character, Sarah Forbes Bonetta. I was not there when Ella and Marilyn went out to dinner and had their chat.
Well,
So
and like with the Marilyn and Ella story, because it was more near history, is there ever a situation where a relative who's still living would take issue with the way that a character has been portrayed? Is that something that you worry about, or does the
no,
realm of fiction kind of excuse
the realm of
any?
fiction excuses it as long as you're not defaming.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, because that's illegal terminology, and stuff can happen that way.
Yeah,
But other than that, no, I don't some people do, according to author's choice. If there's someone living, they will contact that family member and do whatever.
sure.
I don't. Now, 1840s, there are relatives of Sarah Forbes Bonetta who are alive. Definitely Ella Fitzgerald's son is alive. He's in his 70s.
Hmm.
But who else have I written about? Oh, Rhinelanders. My book that's coming out tomorrow, July 23rd.
Yeah. Well,
I'm sure
so
some of them are out and about, but in
let's talk
fact,
a little bit about that.
okay, this one was a recommendation made by an editor, my then editor at Kensington, when I first visited her after signing my first contract. And it was a throwaway conversation. But a few years later, not even a few years, like before the Wild Women in the Blues book dropped, I signed a contract for 2 more books with Kensington. So my first 2 books, Wild Women in the Blues and In the Face of the Sun. My third book is this one. Cover. Yay.
Your third book is
It's also,
Kensington.
yeah, Kensington. This is
Okay.
Kensington.
Yeah.
And this one, the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander, comes out tomorrow. But she suggested it. The way she said it was, I wonder why no one's written about this case that happened in New York in the 20s. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't have any insight on that one.
Yeah.
But I kept, you listen to your editors so that when the next opportunity to pitch story ideas for a new contract comes around, you have it. You have
Yeah.
something that that they're going to have a certain level of interest in because they mentioned it.
Right.
So I did some research on this while I was researching other books because it's a 1920 story. It's a New York story. It involves a very, very wealthy heir to a real estate fortune who fell in love with a young woman who was 3 years older than him. He was 18, she was 21, 22. And she was a domestic. So she wasn't of the same class
Right.
as him. He was a member of something called the 400,
Hmm.
the social register in New York at that time, had a list of 400 names that were the creme de la creme of the New York High Society.
I
Um,
see.
and, getting in that book was like, ooh. Well, notice I said she was a domestic.
Yeah.
Um, when when his father discovered their affair, because they were very much in love, very much doing this, that, and the other, as young people do in the 20s, he sent his son off to Arizona for about 2 years.
Arizona. Okay.
I don't know why. Arizona,
I was thinking you were going to say Europe.
Arizona.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, I don't want to give away the whole. Well, you can look him up and find these are top level facts.
Right.
What ended up happening? They got married when he came back,
Okay.
and 2 weeks or no, a month or so after they were married, a newspaper article appeared saying that heir to Rhinelander fortune marries colored girl. So she went from domestic to colored girl, and the next thing you know, he is suing her for an annulment. And
Because
that is,
she didn't know that she had African heritage, which she was light skinned, how did
definitely,
he
she
not?
was definitely, she could pass. She could definitely pass. But she was the daughter of immigrants from England. Now, this is
Ah,
getting into the structure of racism and in America versus Britain.
sure.
But in that time period, if you were a Jamaican descent, for example, you could be mulatto, and mulattoes had in Britain had a different cultural hierarchy than coloreds or Negroes. They were considered colored, but they were not. It was just not the way it is way it was in America, the way it is in America. Something called the one drop rule existed in America, which meant if you had one drop, I don't care how many years back, of black blood, you were black.
Ah, okay.
And that he claimed that she didn't tell him that she was colored. So it gets complicated.
Yeah. Well, now I'm like, did she know? Or like, was she hiding it? Or is that what the heart of the trial was all about?
I would say that it's a question that is definitely explored in the story.
Oh, how interesting. I
But
love 20s.
also,
I love New York, but that just adds a
oh yeah,
whole other.
1920s, and in the story, I did another dual timeline because I love them. And her niece is in the 1940s is a newspaper uh, reporter. Well, actually, she's an assistant to a columnist. She was only about 20, 21 years old. And she is asked to interview her aunt, whom she is estranged from
Ah,
for the particular reasons, because her mother, her aunt's sister, married a
okay.
black man and declared herself Negro on her marriage license. So it
Mm.
gets complicated.
Yeah. Oh,
But the
fascinating.
fun part of writing this story, and the hard part, was getting to what I felt was the heart of the story. And in many ways, what I feel and felt is the heart of the story is that a love story ran right into the politics of classism and racism. So,
Yeah.
right into it, and someone had to pay because,
Wow.
yeah. So it has some fun moments.
It sounds like it. So that's out tomorrow
Yes,
everywhere, I assume.
everywhere books are sold. Um, yeah, because I have two publishers, William Morrow. I have 2 books with William Morrow, and that's
Yeah.
Collins. That's The Other Princess and Can't We Be Friends, the book
Okay.
I co-wrote with Eliza Knight. And then I have now coming up on my 3rd book with Kensington. And I'm
Right.
working on my 4th book for Kensington, which is due as soon as I finish it.
Do we
And
get any kind of preview of what the topic for that one will be?
the topic of that book is my first foray into something a little bit more tense. It's suspenseful, and you might even call it a historical psychological thriller.
Oh,
But I have 3 POVs, 3 women who seem to be on a path going this way that eventually crosses. Oh, can't see my hand. They're going this way until they go this way.
okay.
And it starts in Chicago, includes a boat ride to Jamaica, and then ends up in a place called the Cockpit Pit Mountains of Jamaica, uh, in a small village called the Akambong. I can't pronounce it. I have to
That's
look
okay.
it. Yeah,
That sounds like my catnip. Thrillers plus historical fiction. Yes, please.
yeah, set in 1935. It's set in
Okay.
1935. So
Well,
lots of fun.
I have to shift us a little bit because the one thing that we always talk about on this show is sort of process. And I
Mhm.
haven't gotten to there with you because you've had so much other really interesting stuff to talk about. So we only have a few minutes here at
Okay.
the end, but I would love to know sort of how do you approach the actual writing process? And I would love it if you would talk about things like plotting or outlining,
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
structure,
Yes.
beats. Do you write in a linear fashion? Are you all over the place? How do you actually do the writing?
Honestly, I am honing my process because I want it to be better. I want it to be more, um, because I have never been one who thought of myself as a pantser, using that terminology, where I just sit down and write from front to back and there it is.
Yeah.
No, I have to outline. But I have to be more constructive with that outlining process. So I use different methodologies, including I've played around with Lisa Crone or Cron,
Mm-hmm.
um, and
Story
her
genius.
Story Genius. Um,
Does she? I didn't know she had a sort of a formulaic approach. I've read the book,
it,
but
yeah, it's in there. It's in there. But the
okay.
interesting thing about her, she's only deals from the protagonist's viewpoint. If you put that book in search mode, you cannot find the word antagonist ever. So
Huh.
that's it's if you want that approach. I've used it. I touch upon it now and then. Right now, I'm actually playing around with James Scott Bell's Right from the Middle,
Yeah.
and I do like that one. I like Larry Brooks
Yeah.
and his 4-part structure. So the other thing you can do in Scrivener, now a lot of people talk about creating their corkboard. You know, you can do a corkboard in Scrivener.
Yeah. I don't move things around. I'm super linear, so
Oh,
I don't
really?
like looking at it that way. It scares
Oh,
me.
I will write. I've written the last scene of the book I'm working on,
Oh,
and I'll write. And look at her; she's like shaking. I don't write in order, but the habit that I want to get into is the dirty first draft and completing it and
yeah.
completing it in a fashion that doesn't cause me to take forever to edit it or to
Yeah.
write it up. So that means shorter first drafts that
Do
you
you
can
enjoy
record.
do you enjoy revision?
I love
Oh,
revising.
you do?
I
Okay.
love it.
Because I've had this conversation with so many people now. And I've been editing books for 10 years.
Hmm.
And so see lots of different processes. And it just fascinates me how writers write. And if you listen to Becca Syme at all
Yes,
talk
yeah.
about, process and mindset, there isn't a right way, right? We all have to do
Yes.
it according to our own individual brain chemistry and personality and what works for us. So for me, the dirty first draft would be the only draft because I can't go back to it. It just bores the crap out of me. Once I've written it, it's done. So
Okay.
instead, I write recursively. I write, start at the beginning and work my way through, but it's not one draft. By the time I get to the end, I've touched all of it at least 3 or 4 times because,
Sure.
I have to reread and rework and, I have to add this in. But I couldn't even imagine going back.
I know another author who writes that, well, she calls it a dirty first draft, but it's clean. It's a clean first draft. So when she goes back to read it again, well, her process is to send it to her beta readers at that point. And then when they get it back and her sensitivity readers, blah, 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 blah.
Yes, that's how I am. I need outside input after that first pass.
Yeah. Well, I have all of these. I know where the story should be going. I know what the key moments are. I also do a big character diagnostic before I start. I know who these people are, or I think I do. And then once I get them on the page, I get them down, but then as the story unfolds and develops, I find that I'll go back and I tend to spend too much time on the first act. But to me, the first act is critical. You've got to have all of your stuff that keeps the reader and the characters propelling them into the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So I love to rewrite. I don't call it rewrite. I love to just go back in and just make it, just smooth out the prose, deepen characterization, make sure that this, that, or the other, I can't stand echoes, for example. It's like, get rid of that mess. And if I'm writing in first person, present tense, or in this book, everybody's first person present tense, but there are times where I switch back on tenses and things like that. I want that flavor and voice consistency for each character. So how am I doing that and differentiating? These are top level things that I'm always doing. In addition to when I get to a point where I'm like, I need some research here because that's going to help me.
So do you write for a certain amount of time every day? Do you set yourself a schedule, or how do you?
That's a goal, but I tend to, remember the discipline word. I tend to start my morning with social media catch up and what have you for an hour or two, but that feeds into maybe 4 or 5, 6 hours of writing, but it's not always as consistent as I'd like. Discipline needed. My best writing hours, and I'm trying to get out of this habit, are between 2 and 5 a.m.
Well, I think that's one of those other things that it is how you are, and sometimes I question, like, can you change that? If those are your flow hours,
I don't mind a 2 or 5 because the world is quiet. The world is quiet between 2 and 5.
No distraction.
But I don't mind that because, I can always just go to sleep or not. Sure. But what I would like to do, since I have so many other things going on, is to concentrate and have a 4 to 6 hour slot where I'm 100% focused on writing. And I was doing that recently when I was working with 2 other authors in an accountability session, and we'd start at 7:30 in the morning and go straight till 2. And 45-minute slots, boom, let's go. And that was some of the most productive sessions I've had in the recent times.
Yeah. I feel like we're always sort of adjusting, and then life kind of intervenes. There'll be some weird life thing that you have to deal with over here, and then you got to figure it all out again.
Sometimes I have to play with my granddaughter now and then, and do stuff
that doesn't sound bad.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, is there anything that you feel like is really integral to the way that Denny S. Bryce approaches the writing process or the book world in general that we didn't touch on that you just want to share?
Well, now that I think about it, I'm not sure, but I will maybe reiterate how important it is for stories to be told and read by as many people as possible. And I'm a proponent of diverse reading. And I would want more readers to stretch their wings and read whatever genre they're into, but not always repeat the same things. Test
Yeah.
it out. And I am a reader. I read everything. I read everything. I mean, I have romance. I'm a book critic, so this little bit of these few books back here, I have 2 rooms of books that I get books mailed to me every day. And I'm going to touch those books and take a look and see what's happening in romance, in historical fiction, in contemporary literary fiction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want to be a well-rounded reader. And I encourage more readers to explore
Yeah.
outside of their, um, what they usually would read. So
Yeah.
read more
That's a
Black
great.
books. Read more books by women of color. Read more books by women. Go for it. Get it done.
Yeah. Well, and even just step outside your genre. There's so many, and I think because I've been in romance for such a long time, I find those readers especially like just really get into this, like, this is what I read, this little tiny thing. And there's so much more out there. I mean, the bookstores are like candy stores, right? Just turn around and there's something
Absolutely.
else.
Absolutely. And I understand there, I've talked to readers who are very much about romance. And that's fine. Just read more people than,
Yeah.
this one narrow thing, and don't assume. I mean, there's this thing that you'll hear about that always surprises me, that people can't read or have a problem reading about Black love because they can't imagine Black people being happy and in love. They're predisposed to the tragedy of the Black community, and what we call pain porn. And those things, those stories historically have a place, but there are also joyful stories that
Yeah.
should be read. And you can find, I mean, romance writers like Farah Rashan, and Vanessa Riley, who writes historical fiction, Tia Williams, Kennedy Ryan, who writes meaty romance, contemporary romances that'll just, so I'm like, get out there and read. I read all these people. I also read, who's I'm reading right now, that Tessa Bailey.
Mhm.
Just so many folks that are out there. And I just finished reading The Silent Patient, which is a thriller, a psychological thriller that is
Oh, I don't know
absolutely,
that one. It's good.
absolutely, yeah, it's a good book.
Okay.
There I go. Like blah blah
Great.
blah.
Well, I sure appreciate it, Denny. I appreciate the time that you've given me today and the insights that you've shared. Will you tell us one more time where to find you?
Yes, you can find me online at DennySBryce.com. I am on Instagram. I am on TikTok. I am on Twitter X, and then Facebook. And then I have a newsletter. Please sign up for my newsletter because I always have surprises in the newsletter, and just sharing what I can that is most um, appropriate, if you will, in a newsletter.
Sure.
And that's sort of where you can find me. And
And the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander releases tomorrow.
July 23rd, and
Okay.
it is a gripping, compelling must read, according to Victoria Christopher Murray. And
Well,
Victoria co-wrote with. She has a new book coming out called Harlem Rhapsody, but she also is a New York Times bestselling author, along with Marie Benedict, of The Personal Librarian and The First Ladies. So
Okay.
she read that. She read that for me and gave me that blurb. So it's made me very happy.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to hit stop. Don't go anywhere yet. Okay. 1 second.
You can find story writing tips, tricks, coaching, and courses at our site, www.evidentinc.com. Get live feedback in our writing community at Facebook at facebook.com/evidentinc. And find past episodes of Story Strategy at our YouTube channel. Story powers the world, and we can't wait to help you tell yours.